I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to Campfire Talk. This is where we sit around the fire, put our feet up with a cold drink, and let the conversation flow. Tom, would you like to make an announcement before we get rolling?
I would absolutely love to. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And it's the same announcement that we've made a time or two in the past. We thank you for joining us, but we also would like to hear from you in the sense of click the like and subscribe if you like the show. Subscribe, share it with your friends. And if you want to go the step further, you can do that. A lot of people do that. And that's on Patreon. You go to patreon.com/Creek Devil. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and just go to the description. We've got a link in the description. And even though Patreon's recommending more, we're sticking with, you can do it for as little as $1 a day, or excuse me, $1 a month. And so with that said, I'm going to hand the mic back to Will, and we'll go from there.
Little Freudian slip there, Tom. You were hoping for the $1 a day, right?
I'm telling you, yeah.
Well, I was telling everybody before we started about the, I think I've mentioned a few times before, we have a documentary, our first documentary that's coming out here shortly. Adam is fine-tuning it, and Adam is our guy in Hollywood who's worked there since the 80s, so he's put together a first documentary, and then we're going to be almost immediately, he's going to be jumping into making a second one. So, and Forrest, you're going to be part of that one. So, he's done a really good job. He sent Tom and I the latest version with the updates, and he's done a really nice job with it. So, and Tom, you'll like, I think he showed you the new artwork, the Bigfoot artwork.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And actually, I can't show that artwork yet because it's copywritten, as part of the film. So, folks, you'll have to wait and see that when the film comes out, when it's ready to go into distribution here shortly. But the friend of his in Hollywood who did the artwork did a really good job. And, the creatures look about as real as you can get in terms of just a piece of art, but did a really nice job on that. It's accurate. That's what I meant to say there. The creatures depictions are accurate, the proportions and things. So, anyhow, that's where I was just going to mention that, and I don't know what all you all wanted to discuss today.
Well, Will, what about some of the activity we had in July?
That's interesting too. Of course, we've talked about, the trees being thrown out one night, but there were other things. And these things are in the film. So one of them was, and I want to say, I watched it this morning, and it's, I think the film right now is an hour and 19 minutes long. So there was a lot going on in there. And one of the things was, some of the audio that we recorded. Now, you have to remember when you watch this, we were doing that trip for two purposes. The first purpose was, all of us on the team, it was really the first time we were all working together in the field. We've known each other, we've done things together, but not, right there. Well, I guess we were in the field one other time before that, but this was really, the first real working trip that we did. You remember, Tom, when we did the previous year, that was more kind of a survey of the area. We weren't there with our equipment working it. But this last July, we were there actually as a team conducting our work. So that was really kind of dialing in and getting used to each other and kind of the division of labor sorts of things. And then the other one was we had quite a few pieces of new equipment that we were kind of dialing in and figuring out which techniques were better to use than others. So when you see that in the film, that's kind of what we're doing. It's not really honed in yet, and we learned a lot of things at the end of that trip that we're going to be making changes, the next outing we do, and our work should be much better. But we did pick up a lot of interesting things. Now, like, the parabolic mic, we didn't get that dialed in right away. Your brother Dave, he figured it out eventually and got it working pretty well. But and thankfully Adam had some redundant systems, for things we're recording. But the items themselves, I think it was July 27th. That was the night of the logs being thrown around. The following night, on the 28th, I think was just as interesting because, and unfortunately, the Sasquatches, when they're in the field, they don't always, of course, cooperate with us. And we heard some good audio, vocalizations, but a lot of times they were only doing it one time. So we'd stop and we'd wait and we'd listen, hoping to record more, and then they weren't cooperating. They weren't doing any more. So I'm sure we probably startled them. For instance, I remember you and I were on the same side of the SUV. You were sitting behind me, and we had our windows down, and all of a sudden we heard this loud woo noise like that. I mean, it was unlike anything I've ever heard before. And I've been in the forest a lot of years, and same with you. And I said, stop. That's what we're here to record, is stuff like that. And of course it didn't repeat, but I think we probably startled it by coming up there.
Was that before or after the trees?
What's that, David?
That's before.
It was before the trees got thrown around?
That was the day after that happened.
Oh, okay.
Was it the day after?
Yeah.
Okay.
The trees got thrown around on the 27th. That was the night of the 28th when we heard these things. So, and we stopped, and that's where, David was driving. It was his SUV, so he was on the passenger side, and he heard grunts or growls and things on his side. And of course, we were away from the vehicle on the other side, focusing in the other direction. And so we didn't hear what he heard, but there were, and that location was a place where we drove to from the first road where we put the rock camera and some other things. And we could hear noises. We could hear stuff around us. Remember, we were getting kind of nervous because that's where the deer were moving in that area. We saw 3 deer, and we decided to leave because, they were heading to their feeding areas, and we didn't want to be, there when the Sasquatches were moving into their hunting position. So we bugged out of there and drove up to where we were hearing more distant vocals. And when we approached that area, that's where we heard that noise. But it was also interesting too, once we got the parabolic mic working properly, we went up to a whole different area where there were some big lava beds, and we didn't hear much there. So we decided, because there was, and in the film it shows where there was this big mountain and it was blocking, the sounds would have been blocked, any screaming that was going on, because on the other side of that area, I think to the northeast, was where there were a lot of lakes and things, and we were hoping to, kind of be able to be away from that area, but monitor it with that parabolic mic and see what we could get. So we moved because the mountain was, blocking our any kind of hearing. And we stopped, and it's interesting what you don't hear with your ears. We sat there and got kind of bored for quite a while, but the parabolic mic, we'd set that up away from the vehicle, so we wouldn't. And one of the things we learned was that mic picks up every bit of noise. It doesn't matter how quiet you're trying to be, it picks up noises and things you're talking about. So we put the mic up, pointed it off, in an interesting direction, and we got in the vehicle. And then, we didn't think anything happened, but of course, once we got back, you, Tom, and Adam went through the audio pieces, and in that particular spot, you could hear something, and it was off. We don't know how far away. It could have been quite a bit ways from us, because we didn't hear it there with our ears, but the mic picked up something clearly walking around out there in the brush. Breaking brush and making noise. So just very, very interesting.
Well, and I want to point out that, Will, the area where it was making that noise.
Yeah.
It was 1,000% not a person.
Oh no,
walking around.
no,
doing that.
we were parked on the only road up there in that whole area, and that was way off. And there was absolutely nothing out. I mean, this is the Three Sisters Wilderness in Oregon. There is nothing for many miles in that direction. So there was no people whatsoever out there. In fact, we were the only ones on the road up there.
Yeah, we were. And I just want to note also, in John Green's book, he has mentioned that region as having a lot of historic precedents for these things. Even going back to the Native Americans, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Long history of that region. And it's still very impenetrable by people today because there are roads on the outskirts, the boundaries of that wilderness area, but there is no access. You'd have to hike cross country, like I say, for many, many miles to get through that region.
And it's also the region of, we don't think it's a coincidence, but a lot of people have simply vanished. Now, things can happen in the woods, but SAR teams can, especially with dogs and stuff like that, they usually have pretty good success at finding somebody. But there's just been an extraordinary number of people that have just simply vanished in that area.
Oh yeah, what I think Adam has it on the film. I can't remember the time frame. Was it 4 or 5 years? It was for Lane County. It was 156 people vanished up there.
It was a lot, huge number of people.
Well, and you remember too, the month after we left, the month of August, we were there in late July. The month of August, just that month I think there was 11 people that vanished in that area.
Yeah. So, something going on.
There was just a lot of really interesting things up there. And you mentioned in there, we'd stop and talk to locals, either at the store. There's not very many people in that whole area where we were. And I'm not going to mention exactly where we were, but, very limited resources, in terms of stores and gas, things like that. But whenever you'd stop, it seemed like it was invariable that somebody would mention either, offhandedly about how many people were missing in that area, or I remember we stopped year before last up there at the gas station, and the young guy pumping gas come right out and said that he had seen the creatures up there. I don't know if you remember that.
No, I do. And a friend of mine and I had gone up there, and we were doing a little bit of snooping around. We found the footprints, and on the way back, I said, hey, and this is almost across the street from one of those areas that you and I were talking about, the limited resources. I said, hey, let's pull in there, because this guy sells chanterelles, and he also sells huckleberries. And I bought huckleberries from him in the past, and I just want to tell people out there, if you haven't had huckleberry pancakes, you need to try it. It's the best.
Absolutely.
But I pulled in, and I asked him, I said, hey, I see you got a sign for chanterelles, but do you have any huckleberries? He said, nah, I'm all sold out of those. And I said, well, shoot. He said, there's an area about 30 miles from here, 35 miles, where I used to get huckleberries, but I'm not going back. And that's all I said. He goes, oh, Sasquatch?
Funny how that's their go-to answer.
Yeah, and my buddy was just like, he had to pick his jaw up off the ground, and I was like, well, actually, yes. We encountered him up there, and that's the place where my friend said, when we got back to my truck, he said, I don't mean to be hard, but don't ask. I'm never coming back. And I tested him on that a couple times. He wouldn't even go into the town to get a hamburger. Nope. He didn't trust Tom. Tom might drive on stick going up into the woods. So, but it's interesting. And we spoke with that guy, and he said he had 2 encounters with them in that area, 6 years apart. 1 year, he was just up there getting the huckleberries, and I don't know if he just saw it or he saw it and it threw something at him. when we talked to him this time, about a month earlier, he was up there with his dog, and he encountered two of them, and they were throwing bowling ball-sized chunks of lava,
fun.
rocks at him.
Fun.
And oddly enough, he decided to leave. Well, imagine getting clocked with a chunk of lava at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, that wouldn't be too good. Not
It
something
only happened once.
Not something an aspirin would cure.
It would not. And here's the thing. That's exactly where these other people, same area that other people just simply vanished. I think there's a correlation.
You know, it was interesting, too.
That's my opinion.
Reviewing the film again. And I've sat and watched it a number of times, you know, and, you know, because Adam has made some different changes here and there. And I always notice the part where, I mean, there's lots of things that I take note of and think about since we were there on the ground that might not translate that well in the film. But one of them, you remember where the kill zone was that we found? Or actually, I think it was Kurt that found it, right? Or was that you that found it?
Trying to remember which kill zone.
Well, the one where all the trees were broken over and
intertwined with each other. Kurt found that.
Yeah. Now, you know, when people see that, you know, especially people who've been out in the woods, they'd say, "Oh, I've seen stuff like that a million times," and that may be true. But what was interesting about that, usually it's just trees that have fallen over, you know, through windstorms or what have you. And something we probably should have shown, you know, or demonstrated a little better was the fact that was a singular event. In other words, the brush all around that for hundreds of yards was completely undamaged. It was that one place. And the one thing that stood out was the 4 or 5 or 6 trees that were snapped over 90 degrees, which, you know, in a you know, windstorm brush pile like that, you wouldn't see that kind of thing. And we probably should have found something like that, a naturally occurring one to compare. You know, again, it's kind of hindsight, but you know, when people see that film, you know, take a look at that part. I mean, it's something that most people wouldn't pay any attention to, you know, and it was right on a game trail. So if deer are coming along, they would have to stop and either go around or go a different direction. So just in the act of stopping in a place like that, you know, where they would normally go through on the trail, if the creatures were hiding nearby, they would have, you know, that moment to grab the deer. So,
well, yeah, and the game trail in portions was about 4 feet, 3.5, 4 feet wide, which is a little bit, and it's not a path.
No, there's no hiking up there.
The Forest Service made.
Yeah, there's no hiking up there. That was, in fact, that was
property.
We went cross country to get to that, didn't we?
Yes.
And the other thing is, like, I was amazed, you know, I know people say, and I've got tons and tons and tons of pictures of footprints, you know, probably in the thousands, but when we found the 18-inch track on that old road up there, it actually turned out pretty good on the film. I was surprised by that because I'm thinking, you know, it's an old track, it's weathered. You know, it's not something I would go and show people because it was, you know, it was old. It was probably 2 months old and it had been rained in, but it was still clearly a footprint. And I know people would say, well, why weren't there more? Well, it was going across the road. So, you know, it probably, and this happens often if they're crossing a road, they're not going to leave a whole bunch of footprints. And, you know, where the footprint before and after that one may have been was kind of brushy, so you wouldn't have seen anything anyhow. So, but it was interesting all the same. Well,
and we noted that it was crossing not quite, but almost perpendicular to I think I don't know if they're dually or anyway, it was truck tracks. You know, probably Forest Service vehicle had gone up there, and it was the same depth as those things.
It was.
That's heavy.
It was heavy, yeah. Well, and you made a good point in the film. You said that typically on those forest roads like that, where the tires tracks are in the ruts, those are usually softer, and the center portion is usually harder. And that's true. And still, that's where the print was. It was going, again, diagonally across the road. And it was just as deep as the truck tires.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
How big was that kill zone?
I don't know. What do you think, Tom? Oh, I see Tom. Tom was on his phone, then I switched him to Skype.
Yeah, I think he tried to log into his other.
Yeah. Well, let me think. Oh, geez, I don't know how you would, because the trees were knocked over. They were broken and knocked over. So it could have been, roughly 20 feet, where this brush was all kind of blocking the game trail.
Right.
Uh-oh, let me try Tom again. It says, why is it saying that? Oh, Tom's muted. Okay. Tom, if you're listening, I think you're muted. Oh.
Yeah, I see him. He's on mute. Well, I know around here the kill zones they use down towards the coast is usually mud pits, and they're scattered out. Some of them are small, some of them are big, but they'll always have a way to funnel the deer into it.
Oh, that's
but
interesting.
It usually depends on, I don't know if it's how many they plan on eating at the time, but they'll use different ones at different times. They never use the same one.
That makes sense. I mean, the animals, that's part of the reason, the creatures typically, at least here on the West Coast, I don't know, how it is really the rest of the country. I'm not working the rest of the country. I only know what people tell me, and I can make assessments, but what I've seen with my own eyes and know here on the West Coast is they stay in an area about 14 days. That's the average. And that's kind of about the amount of time before the game animals realize that there's, an apex predator in the area. So either they're really wary or they'll bug out of the area. So, they're constantly moving where the game is and where it's not. Same thing lions do. I mean, they'll go a long ways. And they'll keep changing areas until, the quarry is aware of their presence and, on higher alert. So it's easier to catch game if they're not aware that you're there.
Right.
Tom, are you with us yet? I see him on there, but he's not saying anything. Well, what's everybody else think?
Have a problem signing in.
Yeah, could be.
But,
well, what's everybody else think about the stuff we've talked about?
Well, it kind of reminds me of that situation that I ran into when we were doing the survey up there for Lake Ray Roberts, north and actually west and east. It was actually over Grayson, Cook, and oh heavens, I've forgot the other county up there. Anyway, it was over 3 counties that when we were doing the survey work for Lake Ray Roberts up there, archaeological survey. And we ran onto that circle area, but it actually looked like a natural clearing to me. And I'm going to say it was probably, I don't know how big yours was, but it was about maybe 30 yards across, and it was almost circular, and it was hidden by a thicket of post oaks and cedars and such as that the rancher himself didn't even know it was back there. And I mean, we were finding, deer bones and cattle bones and such as that back there. You remember me talking about that? It was just almost a perfectly circular area, and they had just, I guess probably just sitting back there at their leisure, eating.
Well, Forrest, I was, and Will, you know this guy. You remember Gerald up in Washington State? He and I were yakking quite a bit last night, and he was telling me about an area that, I don't know if it's he that found it or one of his, he's former law enforcement, and one of his former LE buddies found it. It was an area by a lake or a pond up there, and it was like 50 feet long of bones of elk, deer, just piled high in length. Now, that's not poachers. They don't operate that way, and it's nothing else. So what can you think of that? And it's the same area where Gerald's had his encounter.
That makes me think of another guy that I'm not in contact with him anymore, but he, because people come and go, contact you about things. This guy contacted me again from Skamania County, from not that far from where, Gerald's been finding stuff, with a very similar kind of a story. And I'm trying to remember, I have to go back and look at emails, whether if it was in one of the smaller lava tubes, the entrance, or if it was out on the ground. But it was the same thing. It was just, tons of these animal bones, kind of cached.
Well, yeah, and here's the thing. My nephew lives up there. He was 13 years up at a little government organization up there. Gosh, what is the name of that? Fort something. You've heard of it, right? Fort Lewis.
Fort Lewis. Yeah, I think I've heard of it once.
Yeah. And so he lives in a little town outside of Fort Lewis. One of his sons is ever since he was a kid, he's just fishing and hunting. That's been his life. So 2 years ago, him and his buddy were hiking along. I don't remember the names of these rivers up there, but I think it was one of the rivers that was flooded when St. Helens went off.
Was that the Nisqually by chance? Or further?
Yeah,
or further, maybe the Cowlitz or one of those?
I think it was one of the, I think it was the Nisqually, may have been the Cowlitz, but I think it's the Squally. And they were hiking along at nighttime and looking for fishing, camping, stuff like that. And they ran across this humongous pile of bones, elk bones. And he's like, huh. And he didn't think too much about it, but I heard about it from my brother, and I tried to get a message back to my nephew that, hey, listen, somebody needs to know about this. It's not poachers, and the authorities need to know about this kind of stuff. Well, he was, the kid was just getting ready the next night to board a plane to Germany too, because he had a new girlfriend in Germany, so his mind was preoccupied. But it's the same sort of thing, huge pile of bones. And where do they come from? Not.
I've had people contact me with similar things. There's a couple other ones I'm trying to remember, and I actually have pictures. I have to go back and see who sent them, but from Alaska. And I sent Fred that too, and he thought it was very unusual, but lots and lots of bones in this one spot. So not normal predation.
Is that the one where some of the bones are underwater?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask too, because I thought you sent those to me, Will,
right,
and I thought that was very unusual that they were all underwater. However, the only thing that I would wonder is that if they had been sitting there on the coastline before the tide came in, and maybe when the tide comes in, they're underwater. But
some of the pictures they were above the water line, so it was just kind of a big dump area. And like I said, I have to go back and see who sent the pictures, but I asked if they were, if any of the bones were cut or sawed, because, one line of thinking was that maybe it was people who do butchering and then they just dumped their bones. But if you're butchering, you're going to cut the bones, you're going to saw them. So
yeah, but why would they dump them in the water?
Well, yeah, and there were no cut marks, no saw marks, no knife marks on the bones. So that was interesting.
I mean, if you're going to do that in Alaska, you just take it off to a spot way out in the woods out there.
Right, the animals will take care of them. Yeah.
Those would have. But what I'm saying is, I mean, people don't realize that, unless they live in coastal regions, that, when the tide goes out there, you'll have a cleared off area that it'd be that's when people go out there and go clamming and everything. And it's when the tide goes out. And I mean, something could be sitting out there feeding right there along the coastline. As I recall, it was kind of like a rocky drop there down to the and you could see some kelp and stuff there in the water. And I mean, they could just comfortably sit down there on that kelp and eat to their heart's content. And it's not to say that they wouldn't be eating the kelp as well. So, I think that might be something to consider. I'm not saying that that's necessarily what happened, but I'm just saying that that's something that could be considered. And I don't suppose that Bigfoot's eating habits are really conducive to, good manners. So, I mean, they could be throwing those bones all over the place,
Well, I can tell you things that I've seen, two different ones. And these are interesting. Actually, and then there's another picture I'll talk about, too, sent by a friend. The first time we found footprints back in 1972, what we discovered aside from the footprints up on the little rise above the railroad tracks was a place where one of the creatures had clearly sat down in the snow. It was a big butt print, partial, the prints of the upper legs where it was hanging its feet over this embankment, and a fist print next to it. And to me, it gave me the impression where the guts were was like, it just threw them over there. I mean, there was no other way it could have got there. So that was interesting. Another time was in 1988 in the Columbia River Gorge. There was the witness, Hugh Brown, that we've talked about. Him and his buddies, ran into this creature. But when we went back there to do a search of the area, there was this little knoll, this little hill. And I'm not sure how it was created, but it's just kind of that area is on a kind of an edge that overlooks the Columbia River Gorge. So on the edge of this, in the forest there, not too far from where they had the sighting, was this little hill. And it was almost like it was maybe pushed up geologically about 100 feet high. It was just kind of a real weird looking hill. It just poked up, out of the ground. And it was covered with trees and things. But on the top of that, I thought, well, I want to go look at that because it's interesting. And at the top of that was this circle, and there were piles of deer bones, maybe 5 different piles in a circle, almost like a group of these things had sat down there and eaten a meal together. It was really odd. Like the only time I've ever seen or heard of anything like that. And then a friend of ours from Oregon that Tom and I both know sent a picture of something he found. And this was very interesting because the only bones in the pile or not a pile, they were actually laid out, but there were jaw bones, deer jaw bones.
Yep.
You know what picture I'm talking about, Tom?
I was gonna mention that.
And
yes.
what was there?
And
Maybe
they were of different ages.
8 or 10 jaws in that spot, and they were all together. Very unusual.
They were, but remember, some of them were.
They were different
kind of
sizes,
white,
different ages.
Sizes, different ages.
Yeah.
And the pile that you just talked about, I was trying not to crack up because it made me think of the trolls in The Hobbit.
You're right. Well, you know what trolls are. Trolls are these creatures. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's exactly what it made me think of, was the trolls sitting around, roar.
But I mean, there was, they must have, there were. I'm trying to think. We didn't count the bones, in each pile. I had pictures for it. Unfortunately, they're gone, but because I lost a bunch of stuff in a basement flood years ago, and unfortunately, those pictures were among that stuff. So, but the piles were maybe, a couple of feet across, and there was probably, I'll bet anywhere between 15 and 30 bones in each pile. It wasn't like it was just some, random thing that happened.
Oh.
And they were in separate piles. The piles were probably, 3-4 feet apart from one another.
So how many animals? I mean, that'd be a lot of animals.
That's what I was thinking. Oh, yeah.
No human skulls.
No human skulls.
I know around here they have, you have their general hunting area, and they'll have their kill zone, but places I've seen up to a quarter or a half mile away, you'll find their actual feeding area. How far have you seen up there from kill zones where they've been eating at?
Well, it's interesting. We didn't really, finding this stuff in the past, we didn't really correlate. We'd find, like in the Hugh Brown case in the Columbia River Gorge, we didn't search for a kill site. Of course, in those days, our thinking wasn't quite that advanced like it is today, with the things that we know and see, but so we didn't look for one. And I guess the same holds true for what we found in July, with that kill zone. Of course, that was an older kill zone. What do you think? That was probably a year or two old, Tom?
Yeah. It was, trying to think when Kurt first found it. So that's about right.
So
it was freaky.
And we didn't think about looking for, any places where they may have been eaten. Of course, again, we were only there, we only had a week to spend, and we had a lot of ground to cover in that week. So, if you were going to do a really detailed search, and again, now that we have the time, we just don't have the money to do a lot of this stuff. You really need to be in a place several months of really intense work, dividing an area up and really doing some, detailed searches by quadrants. And, we're just not able to do that just yet.
I will say something about that area that Kurt and I were at. The last time we were there before, the team went up there to check it out, it's one of those Pacific Northwest days where it's just misty, cold mist, fog all around, and which adds to the ambiance. And we're up there checking it out, and all of a sudden we heard something down below, 150 feet down below, suddenly crashing and thrashing through the woods, something big. And we're like, did you hear that? Yeah, I heard that. Huh. Well, what do you think? Well, I'm thinking the same thing you're thinking. I'm thinking, let's hurry up and take our pictures and get out of here.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, that one time you and Kurt were out there, you heard them screaming when they were coming in.
That was an area about 35 miles from there. We recorded that. And that, again, we're sitting there. I look at Kurt and I'm like, did you hear that? And he's like, yep. Okay. And we were taking a picture of the juvenile footprint. And you remember that one, Will? It's like 5 or 6 inches.
That was a good track.
Yeah. And a year later, and what was funny was that's where we turned the recorder on and we drove off. And it was, you could still hear the truck engine as we're driving off. And then you hear screaming from a bird. It was definitely a warning call. And something on 2 feet. I walked right up to the recorder and then just kept on walking. Like it walked up, took a look, kept walking. And the problem is, the whole time we were there, I knew that, well, at least we're in an area where they're not. There's nothing around here. Hey, but they were.
You just made me think about something that's on the documentary that I didn't even think about after watching it, several times. When we heard, and I think that's the place where it's at, where we heard that woo, yell.
Oh, yeah.
After we stopped, we were all out there listening. Well, off away from us, there was a bird really raising hell. And it wasn't because of us. And it wasn't because of us. It wasn't near us.
Right.
And I don't think any of us didn't key on that. We were so focused on listening for the creature sounds, we didn't even think about that. That was a warning.
But I remember that bird.
Yeah.
I do remember that.
And it's on the film. It's very clear.
All I remember was, oh, thank goodness Will heard that too. I was like, when you're the only one.
When you're in the moment, it's hard. I mean, we can sit back and analyze and pick things apart like this. We're sitting in our homes. When you're out there on the ground, it's a different ball of wax. I mean, you're trying to focus, and then part of it's your safety. I mean, we're we went to that place just to place the rock camera, if you recall. In fact, we even mentioned it in the film. We went there just to place. That's all we were going to do, is go place the rock camera. So we didn't bring the FLIR. We didn't bring a number of the pieces of equipment that we normally would have went out with, because we weren't intending on. Yeah, we weren't intending on doing that stuff. And that was another lesson learned: is you be prepared at all times, regardless of what you're doing. I think if we'd had the FLIR, we probably would have seen the creatures.
I think you're right. And that was one of the more freakier, absolute, undeniable moments. It was.
I mean, we heard things up there, and again, it goes back to if we could have spent more time in that region. This is where we make the unabashed plea for somebody out there who's got lots of money that's willing to fund our field work, because with just out of pocket what we did, we had some really great results for the whole week. If we were able to expand that, we would have come up with some really, really astounding stuff.
Well, you remember both times that you and Adam, the film crew came up, I told you I had two major fears about that area. Fear number one is that they would not be there, that we wouldn't find anything.
Yeah. Well, you roll the dice when you go out anyway. I mean, but we have areas that are targeted. We know the creatures are there.
Well, fear number two is that they would be there.
Well,
Tom, you know what my fear is? That my cousin is going to have his nose in the ground too much, and he's going to get swiped by one day.
Right?
That's my problem. I'm always, focusing on the ground and what's going on, not paying that much attention around me.
That's true, because you and I, when we heard that weird growly howl, whatever it was, and we got out of the truck, and we were looking to the west, I think.
Right.
And my brother was driving. He got out, so he's on the east. And we had, the van between us and him, and something growled at him, like he said it was like this projected growl, and you could pick up this intensity to it. And he looks over at you and I to see what our reaction is. And, we're just, there's no reaction to it. Well, that's because we didn't hear it.
Right. Well, and we weren't really
so he thought everything was cool.
We weren't really that close to him either. Remember, we got out and we stepped away from the vehicle, kind of in the direction where we heard that vocal. And then he never said anything, until we were at the vehicle later.
Right. We're like, oh, I didn't know that. And he was like, well, thanks a lot,
Right. Yeah. Your brother would have been lunch, and we wouldn't have known it.
Well, and he had the keys to the truck, so we would have, who wants to start hike out of here?
We'd have been screwed.
Yeah.
Well, there wouldn't have been much choice at that point.
No, there wouldn't.
Well, they've got their midnight stack. I guess we're safe. It's a good thing Dave's not here, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Well, that little footprint that took a picture of in the the brush pile area, and months, maybe about a year later, Kurt and I were up there doing some of our snooping around, investigating, and that was the first time that we drove up in there. Every single place that we went, we were being tailed by somebody from this Forest Service truck.
See, that's interesting to me.
Well, and we tried to ditch them. So we go over here and we go there, and within a few minutes, there she is again, driving by.
But you're kind of limited on the roads because there aren't many roads up there.
No, that's exactly right. So we went to this one area where we'd seen these humongous wolf tracks that were the size bigger than my hand. And then there was smaller cub tracks that were walking next to her. This was all in dried mud. So it'd been some time ago. And that the cub, I say in quotations, those tracks were the size of your average German Shepherd. So we went up to that area, lo and behold, there she is again, and she sees us, and she backs down. And then we went to the brush pile area. Well, she ain't going to follow us there. Well, she did.
That's interesting.
And I told Kurt, I said, all right, she's going to go up around. She's going to go around that corner. And she's going to go up. We're going to see her in about 15 minutes because that's a dead end up there. And that's where all the trees have been, the bark had been torn off.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, when she comes back, I'm just going to wave her down and say, hey, can we get a selfie? That'll be the reason to wave her down. So we did that. And we get to talking with her, and, we're both kind of holding our cards close to our chest, so to speak, at that time. And then finally I told her what we were doing up there. And then you could see she kind of breathed a sigh of relief. And then I showed her that picture of the baby Bigfoot track. Mm-hmm. And I said, it wasn't there then, but I said, when we took that picture, it was right down, and I pointed to this spot where it was. And I said, you have a hard enough time with boots on, walking in that stuff. I mean, it's like walking in broken terracotta.
Right, and that was a deep track.
It was a deep track. And she goes, yeah. And she has Forest Service firefighter boots on. So, those are those expensive ones.
Oh, yeah.
And she took a look at the track, and she said, that is not human, and it's not a bear. And she paused for a little bit, and she said, can I tell you guys something? I'm thinking, well, actually you can, yes.
we'll make an exception this time.
Yeah. She goes, well, about 2 hours ago, I was down, and this is the road that you, me, Kurt, my brother Dave, and Laura were on that first day when we got growled at. Okay, so that's the road. She goes, I was down on road such and such about 2 hours ago, and something happened that I've never experienced ever in my life. And I was walking down there, and I suddenly got this intense feeling of fear and an intense feeling that I need to leave now. And I did. And I said, I am glad you did. And I said, just so that you know you did the right thing. I told her what we do for a living, and I said we've interviewed countless people that have experienced that. That is a very frequent experience. Okay, we hear that a lot. It's not every single time, but we hear it quite a bit. And I said, so would you mind taking us down there? She goes, no, come on, I'll show you where it is. And she did, and then she marked it off with timber creasing tape. And we walked back to where she had that creepy feeling, and she goes, you know what, everything's fine now. Yeah, and the birds were chirping, and everything was fine. And so we walked a little further. We walked her back to her truck, make sure she'd get in her truck and everything, she'd be fine. And then Kurt and I turned around, and we went further up the road and around the corner. And you remember that little Doug fir that was snapped over right next to the road?
Right.
Yeah, that's where it was. And then we didn't go too much further, but you and I did when the team came up in July. And that's when we heard that growling. And Dum Dum here was like, was it really growling at us? So I walked further into the brush to test the water, so to speak. Okay.
It was.
What did you say? Yes, it was there. And what did you say? You said, we're going to be nonchalant, turn around, act like we haven't heard anything. We're not running.
Well, and you remember Adam even said, he put it on a film. He said that I was on high alert, and I wasn't feeling good about that place. We needed to leave. And we were heading back to the vehicle, and Dave wanted to go back with a parabolic mic. And I said, no, let's
No.
And we got in the vehicle, and we drove up towards the area where we're hearing those noises from the distance. And that's in the film where Adam talks about that. And that's where we heard the loud woo sound and had these other things happen. So, the creatures were moving into position. And that's why I say, you don't want to be in their areas when they're getting ready to feed, when they're hunting. You know, because
really at 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah. Well, you know, we were. You know, we experienced those things at that time frame and on multiple nights. So it just showed that, you know, this is, you know, people out there, I know people listening are like, oh, well, we can go out at 2:30 in the morning and find the things. Well, you're going to go out and find yourself in a brown paper bag. You know, Bigfoot, right? Bigfoot sack lunch.
Yeah, exactly. No, that was an experience. What we experienced there was something that I had never experienced before ever. You said you hadn't, and we're all in the kind of a what in the heck mode. Remember that?
Yeah, there were some different. It was a good learning experience. There were lots of different things that went on.
Yeah, and. It was interesting. So
it goes back to that needing to spend more time in an area, you know. So if anybody out there is wealthy and wants to support us and be part of this, you know, we're open.
Right, exactly.
We have the time. We just need to be able to go there and be there for a while.
Well, and the stuff that we would do, the video that we would come up with, would be unique. Nobody's ever done it.
We would get a lot of stuff, especially we have different techniques than anybody uses, and I'm not going to say what those are because I want to maintain us being the only ones to use those.
Right.
So, but anyhow, yeah, it was interesting, and I know if we'd had more time to really work a couple of those places, now it was obvious where the creatures were and where they weren't. You know, as I told you guys, like with the snap trees. I said, you know, it's as important. It's just as important what you don't see as what you do see.
Sure is.
The day we were up there looking at a couple of the markings that we found, the real clear ones, they were fairly fresh. And we went another 30 miles to where the Boy Scout camp was. And I told everybody, I said, now, don't say anything. Just count how many of these you see from here to the 30 miles we're driving through that 30 miles of forest. And if you recall, nobody saw a single one anywhere.
Not a one.
But when we got to the Boy Scout camp, there was one, I think 100 yards before we got there. Very good one.
Yes. Yeah, there was.
It was an older one, but because the tree was actually starting to grow, but the top broken was, you know, horizontal. But it was clearly snapped over.
And all the other trees were perfectly fine.
And it was in a group of them, roughly the same size, same age, protected from weather, blah blah blah. You know.
Absolutely, they all should have been impacted had it been a weather event.
Exactly,
and it wasn't.
Or some animal doing something. It would have been more than just the one. Everything else was pristine around it. So, and I've mentioned that before. That's how I found these things before. You could easily mistake something and say, "Oh, this was Sasquatch done," when it might have been a simple weather break or something like that. So it's almost subjective. You know, you have to really, to me, I can recognize the older ones because I've seen enough of them. But, you know, somebody who's not as familiar might say anything that's broken could be Bigfoot if it's unusual to them. So I look at the fresh ones.
You know, yeah. Going back to the area where you and I heard the woo, you know, that real freaky sound. You know, YouTube comes up with suggestions, and one of the ones that it came up with for me was this gal from Europe who came to America. It was experiencing everything that's American and Americana. Her name's Ava Zubeck. So if you guys want to check out her channel, it's really interesting. But I reached out to her. I thought, well, what the heck? Because I could tell that she was either in Oregon or coming to Oregon. I think she was in Oregon at the time. So I shot her an email. I really didn't expect to hear back from her, but I think the subject line was something like a very American thing to do. And then in the email, I said, hey, would you be interested in checking out Bigfoot? This is something our team does. And I put some links into both our website, your website, and the YouTube channel showing that we're legit. We've been out there. And she responded back by email fairly quickly. So I said, okay, cool. We coordinated where to meet up at. We met her. We got to meet up with her. And so I had already booked a room in, I call it the wooden tent, where we stayed before.
Right.
That's the tent that I stay at when I'm out in Bigfoot country. It's made of wood. It's got 4 doors or 4 walls, and it's got a bathroom, and I'm good with that. But Kurt and Laura had their camper, and then Ava Zoo has her. It's a camper on a Range Rover or Land Rover, old British Land Rover. So anyway, long story short, we took her to that very spot, and we arrived there about an hour and a half later than I would have liked to have. I would have liked to have gotten there earlier to set up the cameras and the recording equipment to hopefully intersect these things as they were coming down to the feeding area. And one of those feeding areas is where we ran into them when they did that thing, at 2:30 in the morning. But I'm sitting there setting it up anyway. Well, what the heck, we'll do it. And all of a sudden, she heard it, I heard it, Kurt heard it, a chimpanzee making distinct chimp noises deep in the forest. And it was so shocking to us. I've been accused of dropping some F-bombs at that moment. I don't know if that's true or not. But I think we caught it on film. And anyway, that was very interesting. That we had somebody who was ambivalent about whether Bigfoot exists or not, but she heard it, and we interviewed her the next day. And then about 2 weeks later, we went back to the spot, where we had that occurrence at 2:30 in the morning, and there was a bunch of huckleberries. I wish I'd taken a picture. The leaves and the berries were all stripped off.
Just like I told you.
The branches. Exactly. And folks, this is a long-winded way of saying, you can know one thing. You can have the book knowledge, you can have the head knowledge, but when you get out into the field, sometimes you just don't, you don't act quick enough or whatever. And I didn't take pictures, and I wish I had.
I have so many pictures still, even from the lot. I lost a lot of them, but I still have tons of pictures because I've always taken a lot of pictures. But a lot of them are of stuff that just aren't really anything. But you never know. I mean, I've taken pictures of things that turned out to be something big years later. That at the time I didn't think was anything, and I won't go into a lot of that because there's just a number of different pictures, but just inadvertently, sometimes you'll take pictures of things, and then later on, for whatever reason, and I do it a lot, I'll go back through pictures just because, for instance, we were up here in Northern California. I think it was 2005. My buddy Jack and I, and I'd mentioned, before, we went to a place where there were a couple lakes up there, and one of them wasn't very accessible. So we never, we just didn't go through the trouble to go to that lake because you have to do it on foot. And there's a lot of, rattlesnakes and things up there. So I wasn't going to tangle with Mr. No Shoulders for just a hike because I was curious to look at the water. So that year we were up there driving, and you could see this particular lake from a couple hundred yards from the road we were on, and it was dry. And I said, "Hey, let's we've been wanting to go down there." I said, "Well, shoot, let's go see if there's any kind of footprints in the bed of that lake." And so we did. We drove to the adjacent lake where you could park, and then we walked several hundred feet to where the other one you had to go into the timber. And we got down to where the water would have been, and of course it was covered in grass, unfortunately, so it wasn't conducive for footprints. But one of my habits is I'll just take pictures in standing in one spot. You kind of take them where they overlap of an area, and just to see what kind of vegetation was there, what if there was, edible things, whatever, And I by the time it was a couple of weeks before I could, get back home and upload all the pictures on my computer. So when I did that, I'm looking at the pictures, and one of them really wasn't that far from where I was standing. It was off slightly to my right front, and it was just, the trees and where the water would have been, and where it sloped up out of the basin, the lake basin, to this little slope. And there wasn't something unusual in the trees, and you and you've seen the picture where it looks like a face in that timber.
That's exactly what you're talking about. Yes,
and not a human face. It's almost skull-like, because the sun was directly overhead, so the shadows, light was coming straight down, so it's the way the shadows made it look. And I've shown people that picture. It's not something I would say, oh, that's Bigfoot. I've only shown it to friends, because it's unusual, and you know the one I'm talking about. Of course, you just said so.
Mm-hmm. Sure do.
But you never know what you're going to get in a picture. So
I was going to mention that very picture for that very reason, because I have that picture somewhere on my computer, if I can ever find it again. But you take a look at the numerical value of the face. The tones in the face are different. There's nothing else in that entire picture that matches that.
There absolutely, is an object there. What it is?
Cuz, is that the one you sent me enhanced?
Yeah. So
and we found some other things in that picture too. Remember?
Well, I'm not so sure about the other things in the picture, but that object there is an object there.
Yeah.
And I remember the thought that came through my head when I first saw that is, well, what do you know? That I am now seeing another picture of a Bigfoot. I can't be convinced otherwise.
It's got eyes. You see the forehead. You see the cheekbones. You can't see the lower part of the face because of the tree limbs there, but
it's got a brow ridge.
It's got a heavy brow ridge. It's an interesting picture. Forrest, I'll have to send you that.
And I did the same thing inadvertently. It's been 2-3 years ago, in an area where we found an area that had been cordoned off by the Forest Service. My buddy and I were there. I told my buddy, the only way I talked him into going up there is I said, all right, we're going to go up this one location. I guarantee you they're not there. Too many yuppies up there. They're not going to be there. They were there.
Of course.
And within a minute, he finds a 14-inch footprint and a trackway. And the trackway led up to this old growth dug fir. I'm like, and so I'm taking pictures of the boulders, the rocks. And anyway, long story short, well, you've seen the picture.
Right.
There's 2 of them in the tree.
Oh, yeah.
And then my wife and I went to the same, and I didn't know it for 6 months later. My wife and I went to a natural spring there, and it took a picture of one that was 50 yards in front of us. I never knew it was there. And those pictures will never go on the internet, period.
No.
Because, they're for me and for you guys, but I don't need proof. I'm happy with it. So, anyway.
Well, listen, guys, we're out of time. But the point of that part of the conversation was, if you see something that you're not familiar with, just take a picture of it, because you never know.
Absolutely.
Anybody else got anything before we wrap this session up?
Well, I would like to interject a big thank you. Again, I do it every show, to our audience out there. If you've made it this far, thank you for hanging in there with us. We really appreciate it. If you've had an encounter, we want to hear from you. And we've been hearing from a lot of people lately with encounters. How do you do it? Well, you shoot us an email, questions, plural, questions@creekdevil.com. And with an email address like that, guess what else it's there for? It's for you guys to ask us any question you want, because guess whose show this is? It's your show, not ours. And we want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. They're very important. So thank you for that.
Well, it looks like we lost Chuck, but Thad, thanks for joining us, buddy.
Ain't no problem.
All right,
Had a
guys.
blast.
Well, we're going to wrap, guys, so thanks for joining us around the fire, and join us next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.